Do you think we sound any less Canadian now that we've been living in America for a while?
I don't know about that.
Or, today we're going to be talking about our experiences living in Canmore. Canmore, Alberta, Canada.
I can't even try to do that.
And it's going to be an extra Canadian. That's not even Canadian. Okay. I'm back. What are we doing today?
We are talking about our experiences living in Canmore and Banff.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've moved, so we thought it was a really good time to kind of rehash what it was like living in a touristy mountain town.
Yeah, and so when we came back from South America in the summer of 2014, we really wanted to make a change in terms of where we were living. I wanted to stay close to Calgary, where my friends were, and we felt like Canmore was a good choice because it's only an hour west of Calgary, yet it was a completely different experience in a different place. And we felt like it might be a little bit slower paced than Calgary, which is a fairly big understatement in terms of what it's actually like.
And it was never meant to be a long-term thing. We talked about living there just kind of through the summer, preparing to go on another adventure, because that's, or in my mind at least, when we finished our trip in South America, I really didn't feel at all interested in going back and living the same way I had been living before, of getting a regular job and going to work Monday to Friday. I didn't want to do that. So we were originally planning on spending the summer in Canmore and then going to teach English somewhere.
Yeah, we talked about moving to China within October of 2014, which is kind of funny to look back on because we spent a whole another 12 months from there, or I did at least, being in Canmore. So just interesting how things happen like that. And what sort of was it about, what sort of changed for us? Do you remember at what point we were like, okay, I guess we're not doing that? Or was it just it just kind of fizzled out?
I think things just worked out really well for us. I remember when we first decided that we wanted to live in Canmore, Canmore was, had 0% vacancy. So for anyone who doesn't know, it's a tourist town in the mountains. So it's a small actual town, but in the summer it gets really busy. Mm-hmm. And there's a problem where there isn't enough places to live because it's near a national park. The municipalities are super restrictive of development, so they kind of create this situation where there isn't enough housing for people. So there was 0% vacancy.
Yeah.
We were really nervous about if we could even find a place to live.
Yeah, and it was kind of interesting because a lot of places that I reached out to would write back and want to know how long we'd lived in Canmore and where I worked and what sort of my history in Canmore was. And I'd say I grew up 45 minutes east of here. I'm from the area, but I don't have a job in Canmore. And they'd say, I'm sorry, with this rental market, I'm really looking for somebody to help somebody who's already in the community. And it was the same thing, trying to get a job. One of the first questions was, do you have a place to live? And then, you try to find a place to live. And the first question is, do you have a job? So it's one of those situations where you need somebody to cut you some slack.
Yeah, but there are a lot more jobs than there are places to live.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, at least there were until recently.
Yeah, and so one of our main goals, our main purposes of deciding to not live in the city again and to move into the mountains was that we really wanted to have different experiences in terms of jobs. Both of us were pretty unhappy in the careers that we'd been working prior to leaving South America, and we really didn't want to get back into that situation.
Yeah, and I think we wanted to work on things we cared about and then have a job that was fairly low stress. So, for example, starting a podcast, we wanted to spend time starting a podcast. We both wanted to spend time writing. And then having a job where you can learn a new skill, but you're not kind of racked with stress all week and then living for the weekend, kind of.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was one of the things that I really wanted to get out of our time living in Canmore was, working somewhere that I could just enjoy myself, and it could be a little bit easier and a little bit more fun, and that I would have the time and the space and the energy outside of work to do things that I was a little bit more passionate about.
And we'd been traveling for that point for half a year, and we'd seen all these cool places in South America, and even before on our first trip, where we'd seen places like Byron Bay in Australia or Queenstown in New Zealand, and thought, wow, it'd be really cool to live here. And Banff is kind of like the Canadian equivalent of like Queenstown. Whistler's probably maybe a better comparison.
I don't know about that,
but one thing that I felt kind of nervous about, I was really into this idea of working in one of these cool tourist cities, but doing something like working in a cafe or serving at a restaurant, it felt like it would be easier to do that in a country that wasn't, or like in a place that wasn't so close to home, if that makes sense.
What sort of drives the thoughts behind that? Like, what do you mean by that?
I think it was like going to university and getting a business degree and really caring about
like job status?
Not job status, but like general status, like having friends around and working in a cafe. And I remember too, like, it's kind of funny because it was very like conscious decision. Like, I don't want to care about things like that anymore. Before we moved to Canmore, but still, even the thought of moving to Canmore, like I would have been way more eager to move to Queenstown because it seems like a little bit more acceptable.
So it's interesting that you say that because I totally get what you're saying. Like, it seems more acceptable because, we went to university an hour away and we still had like friends who were working on their careers so close. But then, so I ended up working in Banff, and Banff is super, super transient. There's a ton of people who come from all over the world to work and mostly to party and to ski and to hike. And so I worked with a ton of Australians who were just like, pretty nonchalant, whatever, just there for a good time. And I feel like, I don't know what point it was, but at some point I was kind of able to forget about, those expectations that I felt like were there for me in the city and just like really enjoy myself.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was close but far away. So you'd have, at least for me, I'd have this experience of like enjoying learning how to make coffee art or improving my social skills by working as a server. And then you have this moment where someone you knew from university comes in to the business you're working at, and you feel like this kind of initial like pang of anxiety, like, oh, I went to business school. And it's kind of this like competitive mindset which we've talked about in the past, where you're kind of judging yourself based off a comparison to others, and you're like, oh, they're going to seem like, I guess the unconscious thoughts are like, oh, this person that sees me in working as a cafe, they're going to think I'm somehow like a failure in life.
Yeah.
Can you relate to that at all?
Yeah, definitely. I was kind of afraid that I was going to have that. So just for people who, I guess, haven't followed us throughout this entire journey, Ryan started out working at a cafe called Community as a barista, and then moved into the kitchen as a cook. And I worked the entire time as like a retail salesperson with a fancy title at Lululemon. And to save money before we left for South America, I got a super part-time job serving at a hotel in downtown Calgary in their bar. And I remember when people would ask me like, oh, are all nights busy? Or, what are the tips usually like here? I'd get super defensive, I guess. And I was very much like, oh, I only work here one night a week. Like, I'm just saving to go on a trip. Like, you know, I work here. This is my job title. Like, I made a point that people knew, like, I'm not a server. Like, I'm just here to make some extra cash. And I kind of had this fear that that was going to happen to me at Lululemon. Like, people would ask me questions and I'd be like, oh, well, like, I have a business degree. It was kind of interesting. I guess I just got into this environment and I was having fun and I was relaxed, and it was really clear to me how less stressed I was in that job. And I was like, I actually just don't really care what other people think. The only time it was stressful is like you were talking about is, you know, occasionally people would come in from Calgary and I'd see people that I knew or that I hadn't seen for a while, and they'd be like, oh, you work at Lululemon now. Like, that's cool. And I'd just be like, yeah, it's awesome. Instead of.
Yeah. There's a kind of like a split between intellectually knowing that you don't want to care about other people's opinions, but still inside of you, there's like this kind of like feeling where you still kind of have that model of thinking, at least at first. I think it goes away over time. And I think that's one of the great things about putting yourself in a situation that doesn't really give you that sense of status or like prestige in the eyes of others, because that is like kind of, I guess it's like vanity. Mm-hmm. Putting yourself in a situation that really doesn't give you any vanity, because then you learn that wasn't, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think there's sometimes danger in other people thinking of you as doing well or being a success, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, you can get into something that really doesn't fulfill you. Like, maybe you're a lawyer and you're doing well as a lawyer. Everyone's like, oh, it's cool that they're a lawyer. They're making money. It's like a fairly well thought of job. Mm-hmm. But if you don't like it, I think that can be dangerous. Whereas if you're working a job where you know that people kind of look down on you or whatever, it's kind of like motivating to work on the things you actually care about, because you're not going to get stuck there. Yeah.
Yeah. The entire thing is like, of like job status and working jobs you don't like is kind of interesting to me, because I've had conversations with people who are like, oh, like, I'd really admire what you're doing. Like, I really wish I could be like you. I'm like, it's not really that hard. Like, I'm not that special. Like, I quit my job, I sold my stuff, I went on a trip, and then I consciously made a decision to move somewhere else and to not work a job that stressed me out just to put it on my resume. I mean, it's as simple as like those 20 words. Like, it's not anything outside of that. I think the biggest thing is that it takes that courage to not allow what other people think of you batter you down, because I think it's really easy to be, you know, defensive about what you're currently doing, as I was when I was serving a couple years ago. And it's really easy to, you know, avoid people that you went to university with because you're ashamed that you work like in service now. And I think that it's actually a really courageous thing. And then, you know, and that's kind of what I came to after a few months working at Lululemon. I was like, I like my job and I'm happy to work here and I'm just going to do my thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how there's like kind of some popular memes about how university graduates working at Starbucks, and they kind of carry the tone as if like somehow these people are like failing or something.
Yeah.
But I think in a lot of ways, it's like there's not like a linear path to leading like the life you want to live. So sometimes being in a situation where like you come out of university and you get this sweet investment banker job and it meets some of your like lower level needs, but really doesn't allow you this path to self-actualization. Whereas maybe you come out of university and you're met with, a world that doesn't give you a sense of security. You become a server, and you have to learn how to be thrifty and frugal, and you have to learn how to derive a sense of self-esteem from something outside your job. And then that leads you onto a path in life where maybe you always wanted to do this thing since you were a kid, and now that you're working in a job that's really like, you just show up, you do it, and you go home, that really allows you to follow your passion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Anyways, we're kind of got down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but I think that was kind of one of the main kind of, I don't want to use the word struggle, but like moving to this like tourist town and working in the service industry, I think it was a very like valuable experience for me.
Yeah. And one thing that I want to add sort of to that, I think something that made being confident in my life choices was the people that surrounded me, like living in Banff and Canmore. Like, it's really not a weird thing in those places to work in service.
And so many people have university degrees and are just there.
Yeah.
Working.
I mean, one of my closest friends at Lululemon has an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree. And she was in the exact same position as me at Lulu. And she moved from Ontario. And she was kind of just she was in this place where she's like, I was working this job and I was really unhappy. So I moved and I got this job. She's like, I'm way healthier. I'm way happier here. And it was kind of just this place that she was in her life where she was kind of figuring out what she wants to do. And I think that's something that really helped me out when I got there, and I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be hard for me. I don't want to be defensive when I'm working in retail. And it was just seeing people around me who were also sort of in these like places in their lives, like, they were post-travel or they were pre-travel, or just kind of like figuring out what they want out of life. And I was like, cool, that's awesome. Like, I think it's really easy if you don't know what you're doing to get into some sort of office job and just work it for 10 years because it's comfortable and it's secure and it pays you enough money and you've got sweet benefits. But consider, not living in a concrete jungle and living in a mountain town and meeting people from all over the world and being supported in your goals and dreams instead of encouraged to just stay where you are. So I think, that's a cool thing too when I consider Canmore and Banff. And it's something that I actually really miss about living there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's something you'd find in a lot of places that are similar to Canmore and Banff, where it's like a tourist-dominated town. The people you find there are kind of interesting and more transient, and I think like seeking something more from life than just getting bigger paychecks and like nicer cars and things like that. Like, it's people generally who are realized that it's also important to be enjoying life now. There's obviously a few people who have like skewed that balance way too far to the short term and are just like there to party.
Yeah.
But
totally.
There's also people who are really trying to find this balance between enjoying life right now and creating a life that's enjoyable in the future.
Yeah, and something that's kind of cool that I kind of noticed, like, because I still have a really good group of friends in Calgary, and I really tried to nurture those relationships while I was living in Canmore, so I would still go into the city from time to time. But over time, I started noticing the different ways that people in the mountains and in the city had fun. So it's like a lot of times when I got together with my friends in the mountains, we'd go hiking or walking or biking, and we'd find this like free form of entertainment. Whereas going into the city, it was, expensive dinners and bottle after bottle of expensive wine. And I know there was one dinner I went to with a group of friends, and I got the bill and I was like, I make $12 an hour. Like, I actually can't afford this. And it just sort of struck me as, you can work this job where you get paid so much more and you have the luxuries to go out for fancy dinners and spend a bunch of money on expensive wine and food. Or you can make way less money, and you can find enjoyment in just simply talking to people or enjoying nature or going for a walk or just being outside. And that's something that I really, really loved about Canmore and Banff and kind of the culture of living there. It was like way more outdoor based. And I mean, there's a lot of people who have quite a bit of money in Canmore, but there's also a lot of people who are living off tips and rent's expensive, so they don't have that much expendable cash, or, you know, that's just a stop on, you know, their year-long travels, so they don't have that much money. So it's just something that I observed while living there.
Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting experiences of actually deciding to live in a tourist town is when you're traveling, you get this feeling of like, oh, it'd be cool to stay here for a long time, but just kind of being human, you normalize things as time goes by. So when we first moved to Canmore, we're noticing there's like these gigantic mountains all around, and it's beautiful. And we live like right on, like, our backyard is a mountain, so you can go hiking all the time. It's like spectacular scenery. But as time goes by, it kind of just becomes normal.
Oh yeah, totally. I feel like I've talked about this particular thing for me in quite a few of the episodes, and that's that driving from Canmore to Banff, you get the spectacular view of a mountain called Cascade. And the moment when I knew that it was time for me to go is when Cascade was just Cascade. It's just like, oh yeah, I see Cascade every day. It's cool. And then when we made plans to go, like when Ryan got his work visa for the States, and I was like, okay, I'm going to Atlanta in a month or 3 weeks. All of a sudden, these mountains became these beautiful things to me again, because I was like, I only have like 3 weeks left with these like mountains, and I was seeing where I was living all over again, which was super cool. So I think it gives you, like, when you arrive there, everything's amazing, and then you normalize it, like with anything else. And then when you go to leave or when you come back, you can really see how spectacular it is.
Yeah, and I think it makes me think about how previous places I've lived, I've really thought about how I want to move and get somewhere new. And like, it's obviously a balance between thinking that the solutions to your problems exist somewhere else versus actually like actively trying to solve them where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's things about every city that are awesome. Like wherever you live, like there's probably some cool things that tourists love to see, and you're kind of like, I want to move to this new place. But it's funny because once you get to that new place, you can also find yourself feeling kind of like, I will say though, it didn't really, it happened, but it didn't really happen as much. I still, there was things that became kind of normal, but it was never really like, oh, just amazing, spectacular mountains.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I'm exaggerating a little bit. I think though, when you see them every day, you forget how incredible they are. And sometimes I would be reminded as I was at the cash register at Lululemon, and somebody from I don't know, South Dakota would be like, it's really incredible here. Like, these mountains are unbelievable.
Yeah,
and I'd be like, yeah, they are. I'm going to go for a hike after work.
So being around so many tourists, I think, did help with that, where you're constantly being reminded that people are amazed. There's people all over the place taking photos and things like that. And you get these really cool experiences. Like one morning I was walking to work. I parked my car a few blocks away and was walking down the street, and then wasn't really paying attention, was kind of just off in my head. And then out of the corner of my eye, I see an elk. Look over, there's an elk in someone's front yard, 6 feet away from me, just eating some grass, looks at me. And then I'm like, oh wow, this is a pretty amazing experience. And then continue on my way.
Yeah. The same thing happened to me, actually. There's, a mountain in Banff, which is kind of like the little town mountain called Tunnel Mountain, which is something that if you're planning to visit Canmore Banff, I would definitely recommend a little hike up Tunnel Mountain. We'll put some photos of the view on the show notes for this episode. But I'm coming down with a friend, and there's like a group of deer just eating some berries at the bottom. And we see another girl we work with who is meeting us to go for a coffee. She goes, "It just never gets old, does it?" She's British, so it's not something she experiences all the time. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, deer just kind of being at the bottom of the mountain after a hike, eating some berries in somebody's lawn, like that is it's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that you took advantage of living in Canmore as much as you thought you might have at the outset?
So I think that I went through waves. Like when we first got back from South America, before we found our jobs and while we were kind of in leeway. Is that the word I'm looking for?
I don't think so.
What's like the word for when you're in between one thing, about to start another one? Anyways, if anyone knows that word, let me know. www.theworldwonders.com.
Just like plug the website.
Anyways, while we were in transition between, that's still not the word I'm looking for, transition between getting home and getting settled, I feel like we really took advantage of being outside. We were hiking quite a bit, almost every other day. And then I don't feel like I took advantage of the winter there at all. I mean, I went skiing once. There was quote unquote terrible snow, and didn't go cross country skiing again because of the terrible snow. And then once, leaving became a pretty big reality, I kind of got after it again. I did quite a few outdoor activities and lots of hiking. But for the most part, I mean, I went a little bit, but not as much as I could have, considering there was a mountain in our backyard. Mm-hmm. What about you?
Yeah, I definitely think I would have expected to do more hiking than I did.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes down to like, we were working 40 hours a week at jobs. So to coordinate that between our schedules or between your friends' schedules is difficult. And then you still only have those 2 days off. And so, when you've got a lot of other things that you want to do, it can get difficult to make that time unless it is a priority for you.
Yeah, it's funny though, because I think like when you think about moving to a mountain town, you're like, oh, I'm going to hike a lot and ski a lot. I knew I wasn't going to ski that much just because it's expensive, but it's funny how you can still kind of just get lost in your day-to-day routine. And
oh yeah, completely. It's like, and that's one of the interesting things about visiting versus living, like going to somewhere, like Banff or like Queenstown in New Zealand. Like, I know we talked about how Queenstown in New Zealand would be an amazing place to live. And I feel like once you get a job and you sort of make a life there, you do kind of you do find some routine in there, and it stops becoming this like, oh, I'm only here for 4 days. Like, I really need to be, climbing as many mountains as I can or skiing as many runs as I can. It's, I'm here. I can do it next week or the week after. And then it's like, oh, the weather's bad. I'll wait for the weather to get better. Like, there's always a reason not to do it because it's, there's time in the future where you can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you kind of like maybe change from like, oh, I'm here for a limited amount of time. I got to like look for all the amazing things that are here. And then when all those amazing things are going to continue to be there, you maybe are just thinking about things like, oh, it's annoying that this is happening, or it's annoying that this other thing's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
What are some of the things that you miss the most about Canmore?
Oh, good question. I think my friends. I think that I really miss like my community there. It took a few months to kind of find people that I made close relationships with. And I mean, a few of those people have moved away since then. So now I've got friends in other places in the world, which is cool as well. My yoga community. I mean, working for a yoga clothing brand, and there only being 3 yoga studios in the whole Bow Valley, which the Bow Valley is Canmore and Banff combined. I really miss that community. The mountains. I definitely miss the mountains. I liked being outside. The mountains are super grounding. like I found for me when I was having an irrationally bad day, which I think are most bad days for most people, but definitely for me, I could look up at the mountains and really just be like, wow, like this world that I live in is incredible. And
so it was like easier to find a sense of wonder.
Yeah. And I'd be like, this like life I'm living is so freaking cool.
Yeah. There's something cool too about, we'll have photos posted in case you haven't looked it up, but these
don't
like
look it up, just go to the website.
Really impressive like cliff faces that are like so high above you, and you're like, oh, I've stood on top of that thing. And it's funny to have this like perspective of being like, oh, you know, I went and stood up there, that was cool, and now I'm down here and this is interesting.
Yeah, and it's really neat to be able to be like, oh wow, I was on top of that like 2 hours ago, and realize what your physical body is capable of doing. But yeah, I think like the nature is probably the thing I miss the most. There's also some restaurants that I really miss.
Okay, I have a theory, and tell me if you think it's stupid.
Okay.
But I was kind of thinking about how the mountains are something that draws your attention, and you like turn your head up, like you're walking around the street and you're really like looking up. Versus when you're kind of in a city, you're kind of like, you can kind of get that with skyscrapers, but a lot of times your views are kind of abstracted. So you kind of have this tendency to like look down. And I know from like posture is an important thing for your mood. Do you think that maybe because having something that draws your view up makes people feel better?
That's sort of an interesting thing, because if you were to, talk to somebody who was into like Ayurveda or like Ayurvedic medicine, they would, like the energetic body, they would talk to you a lot about heart opening, how if you actually stand with your shoulders back and your chest up and kind of your head tipped up, you're opening up that energetic place in your heart, which allows you to be more happy. And I know that that's totally not your thing, but I'm just adding to what you're saying in terms of, I feel like that could be a thing. It's definitely an interesting point. I know here, I'm walking yesterday in Atlanta and I put my head up for like 3 seconds and then I trip over a curb. So like I'm constantly head down, and I feel like as soon as I tip my head down, I'm trying to do it without moving away from my microphone here, but it's like put my head down, my shoulders slump in, we round down into our chest, and then you're less chest opening, you're more heart protecting. And yeah, I feel like that's less vulnerable, maybe less happy. Yeah, I feel like that's a theory there.
So what are things you don't miss about?
Can I continue with the things that I do miss?
Sure.
My list wasn't done. I wanted to list off some food places, which are also recommendations for anyone who is traveling Canmore and Banff. In Banff, there's a lot of really good restaurants, but some of my favorites are the Bear Street Tavern, has fabulous pizza, and I love their pizza. Nourish, best vegetarian food in the Bow Valley, and perhaps the only vegetarian restaurant, but it's really delicious. Get the nachos. What else is good there? Oh, the Balkan has really good Greek food. I miss that Greek food.
There's probably better Greek food in Atlanta somewhere.
Okay, but we haven't discovered it yet. So for now, I miss the Balkan. And
it is kind of nice how
Wildflower. Yeah. It's like, the coffee's really good. Ooh, and White Bark. I miss White Bark as well. And then in Canmore, I really miss Community, which is where Ryan worked for the majority of the time that we were there. And just like 100 different types of tea, I think. Really good coffee, amazing lunches, like wraps, salads, plates, bowls, you name it, they've got it. It's delicious.
One of the things I missed the most about living there was, I think, and it's something you get in like any small town, but just like running into people you know. And like not having it being like, occasionally it happened. It hasn't ever happened to me actually since I've been here in Atlanta.
It happened to me once for the first time last week.
Oh yeah, you keep running into the same person. That's not true. I would keep running into the same person, but he lives like 2 doors down from here, so that's not really that weird. But even then, we've only run into each other twice. But when there's only like a couple of grocery stores, and like a couple blocks in the city, you keep running into the same people. So you kind of like get your need for human connection met just by like going out, and you're like, oh, I got to go do a couple of things. And you go out and you meet people, you have good conversations. You kind of like feel like seen, you feel like alive.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So Ryan worked at this place, Community, that I've mentioned a few times now, which you should go to Canmore just to go to. Not for the mountains, just for the food there. But he would go to the grocery store in Canmore, and because he was a barista there, and you know, it's this popular cafe in town, it would take him just freaking forever to get through the grocery store because he'd run into so many people that he knew from the cafe.
That's a bit of an exaggeration. I
remember one time where you ran into like 5 people you knew, and I was like, dude, whoa, like you're like popular here. But yeah, that's definitely like a cool thing about living in a small town for sure.
Yeah.
Is there any like restaurants or coffee shops or anything that you'd recommend that I missed?
Well, you've basically hit all of my favorite places other than the French bakery, but El La Fournil or something. I don't know what it's called. It's
just called the French bakery.
One thing I miss though is just how quiet things were. Like our house was just like, we went from living in Calgary beside a major street and the sound was pretty intense to living and just having like almost like perfect silence.
Yeah, like we backed onto this small mountain.
And we were in a quiet little suburby area.
Yeah.
And even then, like we kind of have that now because we're off major thing. There's a train that rumbles by here every once in a while. And there's an absurd amount of emergency vehicles in Atlanta. I don't know what they're doing, but
probably dealing with the crazy drivers.
But when you go out to walk around here, it's just so loud. Whereas in Canmore, you go to walk around and you get like amazing views and like nice peaceful quietness and like birds chirping. Maybe you run into an animal.
Hello, Mr. Moose. How was your Thursday?
Yeah, so I really miss like a bit of the peace that was there versus kind of the loudness that you get in a city.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I find like kind of just going for a walk can be really peaceful, and it's not as peaceful here. It's just, you don't get that same like, I mean, maybe you can get it for a few minutes where you can kind of like escape your mind and get clarity on what's going on with, you know, whatever's happening inside of your head in that moment. But then it's like, you know, you have to be super aware when you're walking here. Like people will drive into you.
Yeah.
So
like
I feel like a lot of times,
run over.
A lot of times when I'm walking here, I feel a little bit stressed. So it's definitely not as peaceful as living in Canmore.
But it is kind of like a balance thing. When you come to a gigantic city, then you're like, oh wow, there's all these things about a small town that I miss. Like it's funny. I think we talked about it before, but living there, living in Canmore, kind of developed this habit of like, because there aren't that many people, there's like features about people that you'll notice out of the corner of your eye, and then you're like, oh, that's that person. Like they've got this square glasses, specific type of bangs. Like, oh, I know who that person is. And then like it's different height, you know, ethnicity, type of haircut, and you're like, oh, and you can recognize people off of these features that when you get to a big city, you kind of initially have like a week and a half of thinking you're recognizing people all the time. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, oh no, that's not them. That's not them.
Yeah.
Until you adjust to feeling like, oh yeah, I'm never going to run into anyone I know, really.
Yeah. No, definitely. That's an interesting point. So you asked me what things I don't miss. Mm-hmm. I don't miss the weather. I don't miss the snow or the cold. Actually, I don't mind snow. It's the cold I don't miss. Like I looked the other day, I think yesterday, it was negative 28 degrees Celsius with wind chill.
What the fuck?
Like people on my Facebook were posting photos of, one girl posted a photo that a girl I used to work with posted a photo. Her glasses were fogged up. Her hair was actually frozen to the point where you could see the frost in it. She had a scarf and a toque on. She was so bundled and she just looked so cold. And I was like, I don't miss that. I can go outside right now in a long sleeve, in some pants and some sneakers, and I'd be fine.
Yeah,
and I'm grateful for that.
It's like this really nice extended fall here. Like the leaves slowly turn and they slowly start to fall off the trees. Like leaves started turning like almost a month ago. And like they're still just hanging around.
The whole time I've been here, it's been fall, and I've been down in Atlanta for 5 going on 6 weeks. Like, what? This is the longest fall I've ever experienced. Being a born and raised Albertan, I don't even think I had a comprehension of what fall was prior to being down here. But people are like, winter's coming. I'm like, oh, tonight? It's like, no, 2 weeks later, winter's still not here. Oh, but it's coming. So I'm grateful for that. And I definitely don't miss the cold, and I don't envy my Albertan friends who are freezing their faces off.
It's kind of funny because I've kind of felt at times like I miss the cold a little bit.
You're cray.
Like the feeling of like really cold air.
Ooh.
It's just kind of annoying to have to deal with and like scrape off your car and shovel your sidewalk. But
ice on the road.
Hopefully it snows here once because that would be fun.
That would be fun. Is there anything else that you don't miss?
So there's not really things I would say. It's more like things I'm happy to be experiencing here that less than not missing there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's maybe...
like all the benefits of living in a big city where you can go find meetups for things you're really interested in, and it's not just like you and one other person, it's you and there's like 40 people who are all interested in these things that you're interested in. You have the ability to go to events, which we have kind of slightly taken advantage of. We went and watched some American football, which was kind of disappointing, but it was
an experience, and I feel like it was a good experience.
Yeah, we did orchestra. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, gonna go see like a Christmas theater show.
Hopefully like a concert or two.
Maybe the Biebs. Best thing to come out of Canada, guys.
Debatable.
I'm kidding. It's Lululemon, obviously.
But yeah, you get like there are these things that I really liked about living in a small town, being able to run into people, recognize people. But there's things that kind of suck where you can't get this exposure to events that you really like. Versus now, kind of get that. But I think like at some point, I want to be back in small town. Yeah, probably.
Team Canmore. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think there's a lot of really cool benefits about living in a city. Traffic is not one of them. I prefer Canmore rush hour to Atlanta rush hour any day of the week. Any day. That's sort of off topic though, because this isn't an Atlanta versus Canmore podcast. This is a Canmore and Banff podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So for our listeners who maybe are traveling to Canmore Banff,
thinking about moving there, do it. We'll see you there at some point in the future. Why are you looking at me like I'm crazy? No, that's not that. That's not what that looks about.
What would you recommend for them to do?
So if you were considering, if you're looking for somewhere to live and you considered Banff, because that's kind of the more popular spot, I would definitely think about living in Canmore. Canmore is just outside of the park, and although the municipal government's a little crazy, like you get the benefits of not having so much restriction on commerce from the park. Mm-hmm. So there's like lots of nice places to live. The kind of breakdown of who's visiting Canmore is a little different. You get the benefits of being able to go cruise into Banff and party, or there's like some more events and things, but you also get kind of this more like peaceful therapeuticness of Canmore.
Yeah, when we first moved to Canmore, I immediately got a job in Banff, and Banff Avenue where I worked, which is the main street in Banff, it was like the craziest thing I'd ever seen. Like I was like, oh my God, am I like in a city? Like, is this actually a town with like a population of 6,000? Because the main street was just so busy. And he used to tell people like, I really love living in Canmore because I can literally, walk out of Lululemon. I can exit off Banff Ave. I go to my car and I GTFO out of Banff back to my little mountain town of Canmore.
Yeah, but like we've done a substantial amount of traveling, and
kind of travel experts.
That's debatable, but like living in Canmore is something I would recommend to everyone.
Yes, and if you move there, I would get after it. Get outside, do some hiking. There's lots of amazing mountains to hike, like a ton. If you're not moving there and you're visiting, still lots of amazing mountains to hike, lots of great restaurants to go to. We'll put like lists on the show notes of places to go and eat and explore. Definitely get out to Lake Louise. It's pretty spectacular. And just like enjoy yourself. You're in the mountains. It's quiet. It's nice. Take the time to just be with nature.
But so overall, how do you feel? So I think there's a lot of people who can relate to the idea of like living in a city, and they've maybe had this dream of going off to whether like Boulder or
Fort Collins,
Lake Tahoe. I don't know what all these other places are.
Lake Tahoe,
Aspen. These are like or like if you're in New Zealand, you're like, oh, I'd want to leave Auckland and go to Queenstown. Or if you're in Australia, maybe you want to move to Byron Bay or something like that. A lot of people in cities have these dreams of going and spending a while living out in whatever the popular areas like that are. And what do you think? What would you recommend to people like that? How was your experience of living in a city, wanting to live in a place like that, and then actually doing it? What was that like?
It was incredible. I think that it's, when you realize that that's something that you want to do and you get after it, I think that that's a really rewarding and fulfilling feeling. I mean, even if you get there and you hate your experience, which, I mean, I don't want to be your friend if that's the case, but...
Whoa, that's a bit strong. What if something bad happens?
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Friends back on, maybe. I think it's really cool when people get after their dreams and they do the things that they really want to do. And if you can stop thinking about what people expect of you and stop thinking about what you should be doing or where you should be working, and you can just go out and really experience life and experience new places and meet new people, then that's a really amazing thing.
Yeah. And I know I felt like some definite fear about going from kind of like an office job to working in the service industry. And there's kind of this sense of like risk of like, what if I quit my job and move away? It's the same thing with traveling. Like, what if I quit my job and go traveling? What if I quit my job and move to like a mountain town and work at a bar and ski a ton and hike a lot? Like, what if I want to go back and then I can't get the same job? And like, we've done it a few times now, and that like risk isn't really ever real.
Oh, that's completely irrational fear.
But it's like something we've both experienced.
Yeah, no, totally.
Where you're like kind of worried about going to live in the mountains and work in service industry, and then afterwards you're like, wow, that was actually a very, very beneficial experience for me.
Yeah, I mean, so in 2011 when I was graduating university, and Ryan and I had made our first plan to go backpacking, I was a teaching assistant for the marketing department at the university. And I remember talking to a few professors who were like, 6 months, like,
gap in your resume.
Like, you're going to be, a semester behind type thing. Like, the next semester of people is going to be in the workforce. And you graduated earlier than them. So, like, you should really have this experience. And, like, like, fuck that. I'm sorry. That's all I have to say about that. And my kind of, like, thought at the time, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go on this trip because this is something that I promised myself I would do when I was 18. I told myself, if you go straight to university, you're going to take a trip before you go and get a job. And then you can get a job and you can be in the workforce for the rest of your life. Not. But that's what I thought at the time. And my thoughts were kind of like, if somebody doesn't want to hire me because I spent the last 6 months exploring this planet that we live on, then I don't really want to work there. And that's kind of something that I've carried with me is, you know, if I do apply for a job and somebody's like, oh, your resume seems like broken and all over the place and you've got like a ton of different experience and we don't really want that here, that's cool. I don't really want to work there then. So I think go in with the mindset of this is your life. Choose how you want to live it. Do what you want to do and make it incredible.
Awesome.
Sorry, I'm just preachy. I feel like all these episodes. Just feel really passionate about that though. Do you have anything else to add about living in Canmore Banff? Any final words of wisdom to our listeners who are thinking about maybe living there or a different mountain town or something like that?
No, we have covered everything.
Absolutely everything.
We're going to put a collection of our favorite photos that we collected in our year of living up in that neighborhood and put them with recommendations. So if you are going for a visit to the area, you can find out more about that stuff on theworldwonders.com in our show notes.
And if you have any questions or comments or feedback or anything for us, please reach out to us. You can give us a like on Facebook, The World Wonders, tweet us. We'd be happy to hear from you. And if you are moving to or visiting Canmore Banff specifically and you want more suggestions on places to eat, things to do, etc., just reach out. We'd be happy to answer anything.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.